Welcome in, everybody. See, we've got a handful joining us. Awesome. We do mute you upon coming in, but we appreciate everybody being here. Scott's got a bunch of awesome info for us. We're going to get started as close to 12 as possible, but we'll give everybody a couple of minutes here to get settled in. Hope everybody had an awesome Thanksgiving weekend. Probably looked a little bit different than normal. Scott, did you do the cooking at your house?
Absolutely not.
Come on.
No, I'm not much of a cook, but it was low key like a lot of people. We, are staying in touch with our family via social media, kind of like our chamber family here.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, just about the same. I was forced to do the cooking, which I didn't really care for. Usually other people get to do that. But it was.
What did you make?
Ham. We're big ham, and then obviously all the fixins, gravy, stuffing, mashed potatoes, all that good stuff. But it was definitely different than normal, but it's all right. Still got people rolling in here. We'll give them one more minute. I'm going to try and get started right at 12 o'clock. All right, I got 12 o'clock on my screen, so I think we're going to try and get the ball rolling here. If people are continue to come in late, that's okay, but want to thank everybody for being here. We've got good session for us. My name is Ryan Iverson. I chair the Professional Development Committee for the Young Professionals. As a part of our professional development series that we've been doing virtually here with the COVID impact. We got another session for you that Scott's going to take us through, talking about government and your role in it and what you can do and all sorts of good stuff. So just so everybody knows, we are recording the session and we're going to have this available for you after the fact. I'm not sure exactly where, maybe on the chamber website or in an email link, but I'm sure Casey will have that to you in some capacity. And then as we're going through, feel free to utilize the chat feature that Zoom has here if you have questions for Scott. So I'll be moderating that and taking a look at it. And throughout the segment here, we'll try and get questions answered that you might have. So generally it works best if everyone's muted, but if you want to utilize the chat feature for questions, we'll kind of pop in and out and ask those questions and have Scott answer those. So quick intro on Scott if you haven't met him yet. He's been the Governmental Affairs Director for the Eau Claire Chamber of Commerce since 2013. Before that, he was an active business member of the Chamber for more than a decade, serving on the board of directors, chaired the Governmental Affairs Committee, and Volunteer of the Year in 2012. At the Chamber, he's responsible for its advocacy efforts. He serves as the eyes and ears of the business community and representing its interests at all levels of government. The Eau Claire Chamber is a 5-star accredited by the U.S. Chamber and serves nearly 1,200 investors, representing over 35,000 local employees. Scott is also a member of the board of the Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce Executives. So we're excited to have Scott here to talk to us. He's got a ton of knowledge and a ton of insight. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to him.
Well, thanks very much, Ryan. And I'm going to get my screen share going here, and hopefully that's working. One of the challenges of Zoom is the presenter doesn't see what everybody else is seeing. So wave your hand if you're not seeing this, but I think everybody is. So thanks for joining us today. We're excited about
On
working.
mine, I see the main screen, but I also see your next slide screen. So I don't know if you need
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, let's.
see if we can full screen that.
We tested it before we started, and of course, the best testing doesn't always work. So I'm going to start over.
Yep.
And I'm going to start my slideshow. All right, how about now?
That looks good, Scott.
All right, here we go. So, well, just to make sure you're in the right place, we're going to talk about making a difference, your voice in government. Appreciate Ryan introducing me. Grace Hansen, our Chamber Government Affairs intern this year, will be joining us. She's actually with us now, but she'll be doing some of the presentation in just a little bit. And I also want to thank Casey Schumacher, our Young Professionals Director, who is keeping us on the straight and narrow on the technical side and making sure everything is happening today. It's great that we can have everybody here despite our challenges in society today. But one of the challenges, if we were all live in the same room, I would do some shows of hand and find out who's here and some of those kinds of things. And we have a lot of people on the list, and we can't really do that while we're Zooming, so we'll dispense with that. But we do have a fairly wide variety of people. I recognize a lot of your names who have joined us today. Other people are probably new to this. Quite a few levels of interest and expertise. So for some of you, this might seem a little bit basic, and for others of you, it may seem like a lot of information coming at you at once. We are going to make, as Ryan mentioned, the recording available to you later. Also, I'll send you an email with a link to the PowerPoint, and then we're going to discuss some things that other information we'll link to as we look through this program today too, and we'll send you those links as well. This is going to be really a broad overview of things, and I hope this, though, can be the first of a series of things where we can perhaps dive into some of these topics in more detail in some future programs. So think about why you're here, and you can communicate some of that to us in the chat, or hopefully we'll make this worthwhile for you. When we talk about the Chamber and talk about policy and government, it really goes back to even why the Chamber or many chambers are founded. Some of you may remember not too long ago, the Chamber celebrated its centennial in 2019, it was formed in 1915 and 2015. And another major institution in our community did its centennial just a year later, and that's not really a coincidence. One of the reasons the Chamber was formed was to get the state legislature to finally put a college in Eau Claire. They had bought the land for it, but hadn't gotten it done. So when the Chamber started, they chartered a rail car to Madison and went down and lobbied for getting what was then the normal school started. So this is what we're going to do today in our overview. We're going to talk a little bit about how government works, kind of a quick civics lesson on federal, state, and local, how they fit together, the current makeup and who's who. Talk a little bit about the landscape of politics today, staying informed. And then what maybe many of you are here to do is talk about specific opportunities where you can get involved in government. Where and how you can have an impact, what the Chamber's role is, and how you can be involved in that. Examples of some issues that we've been working on, including current ones. And particularly, we do want to talk about the spring 2021 elections coming up, because we're actually in some crucial dates for that already, even though we just finished the other one. We have a couple spots during this that we'll stop and take some questions, or at the end as well. And as you're seeing in the chat as well, a reminder to pop some things into the chat if you have questions or comments as we go along. So here's the civics lesson. So buckle in a little bit, because there's a lot of information there, but it's worthwhile to take a look at how all of these things fit together and who does what. So we're going to look at the federal government, state government, and our local governments. Federal government, of course, is headquartered in Washington, and we know there's three branches: the legislative branch, which is Congress, the executive branch, which is the president and the cabinet and all the federal agencies, and the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court, and the other federal courts that interpret the laws and make decisions when there's a question of law. So let's just take a look at what the main offices are and what the terms are. And one of the things that we like to do when we compare these things to give some perspective is, when I talk about a particular political office, we'll look at about how many people does that person represent, or what part of the population do they serve. So we know that the president serves a 4-year term, a little over 330 million people in the US, so the president serves the entire country, has a cabinet, which are special advisors to the president, appointed and by him or her and confirmed by the Senate, and then they oversee hundreds of federal agencies and federal programs. Right now, until January, Donald Trump is our president, Mike Pence is the vice president. We have a couple of the cabinet officers listed there, and they are confirmed by the Senate, as we mentioned before. And we've begun a transition to a new president as a result of the election. Not all the I's have been dotted or T's crossed yet, but we all expect that on January 20th, former Vice President Joe Biden will be inducted as president with Vice President Kamala Harris. And he has already started announcing his picks for some of the cabinet positions. So some of those key positions, they do have to be confirmed by the Senate before they begin to serve. United States Senate, looking at the legislative branch. There are 100 members, each state has 2. And one of the interesting things to note is, because of the different sizes of states, if you're a senator, depending on what state you serve and how big it is, that can vary how many people are in your constituency. So the smallest, Wyoming, which only has less than 600,000 people. If you're a senator from Wyoming, that's all you serve. If you're from California, it's over 39 million people. Right now, the Senate, as of today, has 53 Republicans, 45 Democrats, and 2 independents who were elected that way but caucus with the Democrats when it comes to votes and working together. And there's actually, this is I don't know if you call it trivia because it's not trivial, but as of tomorrow, that's going to be 52 to 48, and that's because the election that was in Arizona last month was actually a special election to fill a vacancy, and Senator Mark Kelly, who was elected, will be taking over from Senator Martha McSally, the Republican, tomorrow, because he takes office almost immediately as soon as that election was certified. Other ones, when we come to January, will be taking office in January, and we still don't have a final determination for the Senate yet. The Republicans won 50 seats, the Democrats and their independent caucusers are at 48 right now, and the 2 Senate seats in Georgia, because their election law requires you to win a majority of the vote to be elected, has a runoff in January, on January 5th, and we'll know when that takes place, whether it'll be 50-50, 51-49, or 52-48. So to come, and something everybody, of course, is watching right now. Here in Wisconsin, we have 2 senators who, neither of which were up for re-election this last term. Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat, Ron Johnson, a Republican. Ron Johnson will be up in 2 years, and Tammy Baldwin in 4 years. And the Senate serves 6-year terms. So every third election cycle, we don't have a senator up in our state. So looking at the leadership of the Senate, the vice president by Constitution serves as president of the Senate and presides over the Senate. And then each party elects a leader to run their party caucus and work on legislation in the Senate. Right now, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky is the Republican leader, and the minority leader is Chuck Schumer from New York. U.S. Senator has responsibilities for lawmaking, and they do a number of committees to do their business in various parts of the government. And any bill that passes the House must also pass the Senate before it's signed by the president and it becomes law. The Senate is important for a number of reasons. One is it's part of our state constitutional system. There are only 2 representing each state, and they serve 6-year terms. And the general idea is, with those longer terms, it makes it a more deliberative body, which slows down the legislative process on purpose so that things don't swing too fast. If you've heard of the filibuster, this is a scene from a popular movie a number of years ago called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The filibuster is the fact that a member of the Senate can debate, and that can be unlimited unless they vote by 60 votes to end debate. So even if you have a majority of the senators, Republicans have 53 right now, for most legislation, if the Democrats want to hold it up, the Republicans have to find at least 7 Democratic seats or 60 votes to be able to move something forward. There are some exceptions to that. House of Representatives, there are 435 members according to the Constitution. They are elected to 2-year terms, so every 2 years the entire House of Representatives is up. This one is proportionally represented, and so each member represents about 700,000 constituents, but each state is guaranteed at least one. So a very small state like Wyoming has 1. Wisconsin and Minnesota, similar size, have 8, and California is the largest with 53. In each state, then, they divide into districts as to how they elect their representatives, and you can kind of see some examples here. Wisconsin, as well as a few other states. Nearby to us, most of us are probably in the 3rd congressional district, where Ron Kind is the representative. He's a Democrat. And if you're in the 7th district, which is the northwest part of the state, that's Tom Tiffany. He actually was just elected in May for the first time and reelected. He's a Republican. Sean Duffy used to hold that seat until he resigned last year. So previously, the Democrats had 232 seats, a majority in the House of Representatives. And as a result of this last election, it looks like there'll be 222 Democrats and 208 Republicans so far confirmed. There are still some seats where there's questions about the vote count, and some of them are very close. For example, in Iowa, they just finished a recount in the 2nd district, and the apparent winner there is leading by 6 votes. So sometimes these can be very, very close. Currently, the Speaker of the House also presides over the House and is the leader of the majority party. That's Nancy Pelosi from California. The majority leader, the number 2, is Steny Hoyer from Maryland. And Kevin McCarthy, the Republican from California, is the leader of his party. Similar to the Senate, the Congress, U.S. House must pass bills that are going to become law. It must pass both houses. There is a stipulation in the Constitution that tax and spending bills, including appropriation bills, have to start in the House. House is important because it's considered the body of the people. The districts are smaller. It's more of a chance to get to know your representatives, and they spend more time in their districts. So how do things actually get done in Washington? And we could spend an entire session like this just talking about that. Sometimes it seems like gridlock, and it has seemed increasingly like that. Bills must pass both chambers to become law and then signed by the president. In those cases where a bill is passed by both houses of Congress, the president does have the right to veto a bill and say, I don't want this to become law. It can still become law if 2/3 of both houses vote to override a veto, and that does not happen very often. Sometimes we can kind of track where a bill goes through. Something that the U.S. Chamber did that was kind of fun a couple years ago when they were advocating for tax reform. They kind of took the concept of a Domino's pizza tracker and tracked the different things that it had to go through. So you go through both committees in both houses. They do markups, as they call. They go through the tax writing committees, et cetera, and finally get to the president's desk to be signed. We also have the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, which is nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and members of the Supreme Court serve for life unless they resign. There's also judicial branches around the country, appellate courts in districts, as well as a smaller district court for federal things. And what we're going to do now, and we're going through a lot of information, but I'm going to go through the list of sort of this quick civics lesson, and then we'll take some questions, and then we'll move on into to information. So Wisconsin, our governor serves a 4-year term. They're up in non-presidential years. So Governor Evers was elected 2 years ago. He will be up in 2 years. He appoints a cabinet, which have to be confirmed by our Senate. Wisconsin's around 5.8 million people, so that's what the governor serves. Our Senate in Wisconsin has 33 members. They serve 4-year terms. They stagger those, so about every year, every election year, about half the Senate is up. A constituency for a senator is about 175,000 people. Going into this election, there were 19 Republicans and 14 Democratic held seats. The Republicans actually picked up 2 seats in the election, so going into 2021, there'll be 21 Republicans and 12 Democrats. They also elected new leadership because Scott Fitzgerald, who is the Senate Majority Leader, was elected to Congress in this cycle. And so in the Senate, this is a little bit different. The Senate President presides over the Senate. That's Senator Chris Kapenga from Delafield. He will be the new Senate President going into a new session. But the actual leader of the party is the Majority Leader, and that'll be Devin LeMahieu, I'm sorry. Still learning how to pronounce it, from Sheboygan. The Majority Leader is considered the #1 person in the Senate, and the Senate President the #2 in the party. And then the Minority Leader for the Democrats is Janet Bewley from up north at Mason, which is kind of near Ashland. Senate is divided into districts that look kind of like this. And nearby to us, our local senators are Jeff Smith from Eau Claire and Kathy Bernier from Town of Halley in the 31st and 23rd districts. They were not up this year, will be up in 2 years. And then the 10th district you see to the left, Rob Staffschold from New Richmond was just elected this year to that seat. In the Assembly, there are 99 members. Each Senate district is made up of 3 Assembly seats. They serve 2-year terms, around 58,000 people in their constituencies. We had a little bit of a change there in this last election, going from 63 Republicans and 34 Democrats with a couple vacancies to 61 Republicans and 38 Democrats. Robin Voss is the Speaker of the Assembly. He is also the leader of the party. #2 is Jim Steinecke, and the Minority Leader, the Democrat, is Gordon Hintz. Those districts, again, are smaller, and if we look at our local districts surrounding the Eau Claire area, you can see the 91st district kind of in the middle there, because of the population, covers most of the city of Eau Claire. That's Jody Emerson. Nearby, we have Jesse James, who covers Altoona, Warren Petrick, who is the southern part of Eau Claire County, and you can see some of the other Assembly members from our area in the Chippewa Valley. And here you see pictures of some of them. Most of these were reelected this year. The exceptions would be Clint Moses from Menominee has filled Rob Staffschold's seat. He ran for Senate. And in the 69th district, Donna Rosar was elected. Bob Colt decided not to run for reelection. There's one other committee to know about in the state, and that's something called the Joint Committee on Finance in the legislature. It's 8 senators and 8 representatives appointed by the leaders of the parties, 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats. And this is kind of a super committee that oversees the budget and acts in the stead of the legislature when they're not meeting. And you could almost think about it as an executive committee of the legislature. So that's a very powerful position if you're on the Joint Finance Committee. We also have a judicial branch. We have 7 members of our Supreme Court. They're elected to 10-year terms, not appointed. We also have a Court of Appeals, which is by district, and then we have circuit courts in the counties. A lot of the kinds of things that impact business in the state government are things like transportation, education because of the university system and the technical colleges, K-12 schools, even though they're locally managed, much of their funding and standards come from the state. We have funding that comes from the state to many local municipalities and other jurisdictions. Social services and Medicaid, economic development, local mandates and tax controls are all decided by state government. Which brings us to local government and how some of those kind of work. So we have 72 counties in the state. We'll talk about Eau Claire County. We also have the city of Eau Claire and other municipalities. Counties and cities don't all do exactly the same thing. And a lot of times county government is one that really flies under the radar. They do a lot of the functions of state government on a local county basis, and you can see a pretty extensive list of things that are here, as well as the courts. In Eau Claire County government, it's run by a county board, 29 members. They're elected every 2 years by district, and given that there's 29 members and around 100,000 people, these districts are quite small. They're about 3,500 people. The county board itself elects their chair. Right now, that's Nick Smyer. And the county hires an administrator, a professional person. That's Catherine Schaff right now. These are the districts in Eau Claire County. And as you can see, with a concentration in the Eau Claire-Altoona area, something over 70% of the population is in Eau Claire and Altoona. So that's why the districts are concentrated in those areas. And if you go to the county website, and I'll have that link when we send this out, they actually have a very handy map there, which you actually can zoom in on. And if you find where you live, you can click on it and it'll tell you who your county board member is. County government also has what are called some constitutional offices. Those are party offices. Those are elected in the fall. And all of these members here, most of them were reelected last fall. We need to update this list because there was an election this fall. And then the circuit court is a nonpartisan that's elected in the spring. Local government issues gets into things like public safety, parking, streets, roads, transit, parks. We have a lot of local regulation of businesses. The health department is actually a joint city and county department. We have regulations for zoning, signs, economic development, and of course, levying of local taxes. City's functions are slightly different. You can see some of the things the city gets involved in. The fire department, housing, inspections. The library is actually a division of the city, as is the transit department, the transit service. City has a mission statement that they use to guide what they do. And our Eau Claire City Council has 11 members. They all serve 3-year terms, and it's made up of 5 at-large members who run in the whole city and 5 elected by district. Each district represents about 13,500 people, a little bit larger than county board members. And then the city council president is actually elected by the voters. So every year we have an election, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as to which seats are up which year, but all of the city council members in Eau Claire serve a 3-year term. Currently, our city council president is Terry Weld. He was elected to his term in April. And if you know, former city manager Dale Peters retired last month, and currently Dave Solberg, the city engineer, is serving as the interim city manager while the council undertakes a search for a new city manager. And in the case of Eau Claire, these are the city council members in addition to the city council president. We have the 5 at-large members you can see listed there first, and then listed last, and then the district members you can see listed first on this. And this coming year, the district seats will be the ones that'll be up. This is what the districts look at like in the city of Eau Claire. So if you live in Eau Claire and you want to know who your district person is, or even are interested in running for a district seat, this would show you where those districts represent. In the case of Eau Claire, we have a manager council form of government. It's one of the rare cities that does not have a mayor. The council is the policy body. The manager runs the city. The citizens elect the council, and the council selects the city manager. Other communities most often have a mayor elected directly by the citizens, and the council also elected. Then sometimes that varies. So in some cities, the mayor actually runs the city as a professional employee. In other cases, the mayor serves part-time like the city council, and they hire a city administrator. And in fact, that's the situation in Altoona next door. They have an elected mayor and 6 members of their city council that are elected by district. They hire a city administrator who is Mike Golot right now. We also have villages and towns, like Lake Hallie is a village, Washington, Seymour, and others are what are called towns, and they all have municipal governments as well. We also have special districts. We have school districts. This is a map of the Eau Claire School District. And then the technical college districts, they also are organized by district and have taxing authority and run the technical colleges. So I went through that pretty fast, but if anybody has any questions about who fits where in local government, I don't think I've seen any in the chat, so we can keep going. But if anybody does have any questions, pop them in there. And hopefully nobody's gone to sleep, or if you do, turn off your camera, right? All right, well, let's talk about the landscape and what we work in when we're in politics. And part of it's staying informed. And I think if you're like me, and I do it, I always did it as something I was very interested in as a chamber member and a business person. Now you could argue I do it for my job, and it's still very challenging to do. And who do you believe and what do you understand? And in fact, is this whole idea of fake news, is that a new thing? This is a quote I think is kind of interesting. You probably heard of Thomas Jefferson. He was elected in 1800 as our president. He said, "The man who reads nothing at all is better educated than the man who reads nothing but newspapers." So apparently Mr. Jefferson, President Jefferson, wasn't too happy with his press coverage. And so at that time, actually, we had newspapers that were very partisan, and you knew what paper you're reading. Was it a paper that favored the Jeffersonians or the Republicans, or favored the Federalists, et cetera? And we have some of that today. And one of the things we have to kind of navigate and work through is news is also a business. And we find that some of you may have seen The Social Dilemma, the Netflix film. You've seen other articles about, news is also entertainment, and we want to get your emotions going. And so there has kind of been what some people call an outrage industry. And it's a new genre of political communication. Filter a lot of things through an ideological lens, and certainly everyone has a worldview, but they can be uniting yet polarizing. You can unite us with our own tribe or our own team, but they can be polarizing between people. And we do have opinion pieces. We need to look at the difference between opinion and fact, and straight news, social media, fake news, self-selection, confirmation bias. And I think one of the things that any of us can tend to do is to read the things we agree with, and not read the things that perhaps we don't. And that's one way of being somewhat well-rounded. You're going to have a worldview, and there's going to be things that confirm what you think, but it's also worthwhile to look at other news sources. There's a couple things that you can take a look at and consider. There are a couple sites that take some attempt to do this. Now, one of the things that's important to say is I don't know that there's anyone that is completely unbiased. We bring all of our experiences and our knowledge and our things that we know to the table, and it might be different than someone else, our background, our friends who we talk to. But there's a couple sites. One is allsides.com, who use an independent panel with people from various sides, and they have them read blind some news stories, and then they try to categorize them as center, right, center, right, center left, etc. And this is where they've categorized some of the general news sites. There's another one that's a little bit more sophisticated. This is actually an interactive website, and they try to even make it a little bit more of a grid where it's not just right and left, but it's also at the top they have more of the most reliability, and at the bottom they have the least reliable, and also where they fall on the political spectrum. So you might find that worth looking at. I think I've seen one of the things that you also find out is if you are in an industry or you have particular knowledge, and sometimes you read the news, you can kind of pick out where that bias is as well because of the knowledge you have in that find. And I've got a question here already, so maybe I'll answer that because it's kind of germane to what we're talking about. Where do I get my news to stay informed? And is there such a thing as unbiased media? And I didn't see that before that, but I don't know that there is anything as unbiased media, but there are some. I think that if you look at these charts and you look at the ones in the middle, I think those do take a greater effort to present both sides, but sometimes you can even see in the language. Other ones actually are right up front, and they say, we have this general worldview, and that's the way we're going to report it, but we're also not going to make things up or ignore the other side as well. So you have to make some of your own judgments. I think we are fortunate in Eau Claire that we have 2 local TV stations. We have a local newspaper, and we have other sources like Volume 1 and others. who do a pretty straight job of covering the news. There are actually communities our size who don't have local news sources anymore and have to rely on outside media. So, you know, here at the Chamber, we have a subscription to the Leader Telegram. We pay attention to the local news sources, and actually Volume 1 does a great job. One of their managing editors, Tom Giffey, is a great journalist as well. So for local news, that's where I get some of it. We subscribe to wispolitics.com here, which is a state news service that keeps us involved and sends us several emails a day of state news. And then look at a lot of other things. National news, actually, if you look at some of these sites, they say, for instance, Politico is listed kind of as a left side a little bit. I will say, though, that Politico's coverage of what's happening in Congress and kind of who's who and that sort of thing, and their outlooks on what's being said, I find very reliable. So I get a couple newsletters a day from them. But really, you probably want to find some news sources that sort of speak to you, and then maybe pick out one on the other side to look at occasionally. And I don't get all my news from Facebook, but I have friends on both sides of the spectrum, and I do recognize occasionally, if you look at this list, some of the ones at the far left on the bottom or far right on the bottom, and you see somebody sharing one of those news sites, you really want to take what's said there a little bit by a grain of salt, or at least check it out. It may be true. So insightful comments here from Jefferson, who said, "We're left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers and newspapers without a government. I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." That's interesting. So we all have to navigate all of these things. So thinking about this, you know, which team are you on? I think we find ourselves with a worldview, and one of the things that politics has done, you probably can tell from my background and the color of my hair and so forth, that I didn't just graduate from college the last few years. I will tell you that when I was first getting interested in politics, the pendulum was almost the other way around, that it swung the other way. I can remember people saying there wasn't much difference between the parties. And I think you can certainly say there's a lot of policy difference. But some of it is really taking things with your own view. And I think you're going to find, if you look at specific issues, maybe going back to that, this quote from Ronald Reagan, you're not going to agree with everybody. You may identify yourself as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, but people who are kind of in your political spectrum, you're not going to agree with them on everything. You're going to perhaps agree with the Republicans' current administration on a lot of things, but maybe immigration is something you disagree with, or maybe you agree with the Democrats on a lot of things, but trade is something that you agree with the Republicans on. So there are coalitions, and that's how people get elected in a two-party system, and those are kind of in flux a little bit right now, with something to think about. If you want to have a little bit of fun, there's a couple quizzes out there that you can take that will sort of help you categorize. You probably just heard me say don't categorize yourself and be an independent operator, but this is a little bit fun. Here's a couple that I've seen people recommend. One's from Pew Research, one's from called youthleadership.net. I am going to tell you that the last time I took these two, they didn't actually put me in exactly the same place. One had me a little bit farther to one direction than the other. So take that with a grain of salt too. And I will tell you that they purposely ask questions that are kind of not in the middle and force you to a far right or far left conclusion. So that's one thing that you'll be aware of on at least one of those quizzes. So let's talk a little bit about getting involved. And I think the first thing is what we just talked about, and that is be informed. I'm going to make a comment that I've often made for a long time, and it seems especially true sometimes today. And that is, I do find people hold very strong opinions sometimes on incomplete or even inaccurate information and aren't always willing to change their minds. So I would suggest holding your views somewhat loosely and being willing to consider another opinion and not hold them so strongly. I realize that there's some moral arguments and some ethical arguments, but in terms of most policies, be open to other information and changes. So we also have a recommendation from Tim Nelson saying isidewith.com quiz on the presidential election is something that would be helpful too. So we're getting involved. Most of you on this session today probably do vote, but that's kind of an obvious thing. But you know, we were bragging about the high turnout this year, which I think is a record, especially in total numbers. But there's a lot of people that still are not voting, and so your vote does count. Writing or calling officials, building relationships, that does count. And if you talk to public officials, they do want to hear from constituents. Certainly there are tactful and appropriate ways to do that. There are also ways to build relationships and to be credible and to be called upon by policymakers if you have things that you share in a tactful and useful way. Beyond doing something on your own, a couple really particular things that you can do that are very useful and valuable, and that is industry groups or civic organizations. So if you're a realtor and you belong to the Realtors Association, credit unions, banks, construction groups, home builders, others do very positive things in specific industries. And a role they can play actually is being looked on as expert too, because they know a lot about it. They can represent their members and they can work with legislators on legislation. The chamber is considered a civic organization, so as a broader business community, we can come by and talk about the business's point of view. You can attend council and board meetings. You can provide input. Oftentimes, you need to connect this with writing or calling public officials. So one of the things we'll post as a link is if you want to contact members of the county board, your school board, your city council, it's worthwhile to do both, to do that individually, as well as if there's a particular issue before those organizations. They do take both written and verbal input in their meetings, and those are valuable, so that is worth doing. You can actually serve on boards and commissions, and I have some information at the very end on some ways you can be involved if you want to be more involved than just weighing in. There are a number of boards and commissions at the county and city level, and even some of the school districts have committees that citizens can serve on where you can contribute in an area that you have expertise. And then of course running for office, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So one of the things I do want to touch on is how does the chamber fit, since this is a chamber meeting, and things you can be involved in as a chamber member, and why does the chamber do what it does. One of the things I'll mention right off the bat is the chamber does have a mission statement, and it's very straightforward. It's the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce is the advocate of business. Now, this was developed by our board of directors, which is very broadly represents the business community. And it means that, you know, we're here to have we say our community is our business, our motto. We can have a stronger community if we advocate for business. And so where that brings policy in is that we will look at taking positions and advocating for issues where it's going to affect economic prosperity of our community. And it's important to do that, important to weigh in with the business point of view when things are being considered at different levels of government. So we also do that in our relationships with our state and national chambers as well, and use them as information sources. I will mention that we have made a decision at the Eau Claire Chamber that in the realm of politics, and by that I mean electing individual people to political office, whether it's nonpartisan or partisan, we have made a decision that we are not going to endorse candidates or advocate for particular individuals to serve in a particular political position. We do get very involved in trying to get information from candidates on where they stand on issues of interest to the business community, and then let people make their own decisions. There are some chambers in other communities or at the state and federal level who do some of this and do endorse candidates, but we do not. Where we fit in is we talked a little bit about the atmosphere we're in now, the political and social fragmentation we're going through in the country. And the chambers, we've done a lot of thinking with our fellow chambers and where do we all fit. And we have a role to really represent the business community and do the things that are unique both to business and to the chamber. And we really have 3 C's that we look at that maybe guide us in that area, that we can hold a unique place. One is we look at everything through a lens of being a catalyst for business growth. If we have growing businesses in our community, we're going to have a stronger economy. And where can the chamber come alongside whoever's doing what to help make that happen? A convener of leaders and influencers. Quite often, the chamber being involved in something or asking people to be involved can make a difference in bringing people together to solve an issue or to influence legislation. In a moment, I'm going to talk about some of the issues we've had in the past, and we've been able to serve a role like that, bringing people together and looking at information. And finally, a champion for a strong community. We do need to have a strong community, and there are ways that the chamber can help strengthen it. This came from Dave Kilby, who's with the Western Association of Chamber Executives and provides us a lot of insightful things. So we develop a strategic plan at the chamber about every 3 years, and we update it. It's done by our board of directors. And right now, our strategic plan includes the chamber being a champion of a strong local and regional economy. You just heard that reflected in being those 3 C's. Enhancing our economic prosperity, representing the interests of the business community and thoughtful public policy, and organizational excellence and bold leadership. And as you can see, all of those have a public policy aspect to it. So I'm going to give you an example, recent example really of public policy. And what's interesting about it is it really touched on almost every level. I think it did touch on every level of government on this major community project. And actually going back to our beginning, it involved the university, and that is the Confluence Project. Most of you are probably familiar with this. If you're not, you probably haven't been around much or you're new to the community. But the chamber worked very hard once this was proposed based on direction from our board of directors to help make a difference and help carry the water and be a key part of the community to make this happen. Quickly, what it was and what it was proposed. Clear Vision was a community effort to look at the long-term health of the Eau Claire community, and a part of that vision in 2012, a group from Clear Vision came up with, through their community facilities committee, with a proposal to improve our facilities here in the community. And the idea was bringing together the university, the community, and private development to have better arts facilities. And they proposed a project that would include an arts center, housing, commercial development, and will also serve to help revitalize downtown, with really some pooling of funding that could be done better by getting everybody together than separately. And that was the state through the UW Eau Claire, city, county, and philanthropic giving, as well as private investment. So they came up with a pretty ambitious plan, but it also required a lot of communication and coordination. And that is, they proposed money contribution from the city of Eau Claire because of the development community and the improving the attractiveness of the city, as well as tax increment financing and creation of a public plaza. Eau Claire County, because of the value of economic development and increasing sales tax receipts. The state of Wisconsin, because UW Eau Claire had a long-term vision for improving housing and its theater facilities that probably would have cost $50 million to do on their own, but to contribute 15 to 25 million to this effort, something under half of that to get the same benefit. And the community to have improved arts facilities and to help generate the philanthropy to complete the funding. Complex project trying to come together. As this was proposed, one of the things we talk about in the chamber world, and we get together, we have something we call the cave people we run into once in a while. And certainly we have to talk about accountability in government. We have to talk about using wisely using public dollars for anything, and to make sure that that's done in a way that's a good use of them. But we do run into some people that we call citizens against virtually everything. And there's always a negative person on almost every positive project. And sometimes things do need to be questioned. But we do run into that. In some ways, we felt ran into this with that project. And so a number of policy decisions had to be made at every level of government. So here's some of them that had to be made. First of all, the city council wanted to do the $5 million in city funding, but a petition drive was made to get it on a referendum ballot that would have required a no vote. Actually, so this is interesting, and it's a long thing which made this complicated. You actually had to vote no on the city referendum if you wanted the Confluence project to happen, and I won't take time to explain why that was that way. The county had an advisory referendum to make their contribution. In that case, if you wanted the Confluence project, you had to vote yes. And then there was an ask for $15 million for state funding. Board of Regents endorsed it. We had a chamber meeting in June of 2014 where the governor came to a luncheon and said, I'm going to put money in my budget next year for the Confluence project through something called a non-state agency grant. And then in January of that year, true to his word, Governor Walker at Chippewa Valley Rally said, I'm proposing $15 million from the general fund for the Confluence project. Of course, that had to go through that joint finance committee that I talked about earlier and be passed by the legislature. And it took a very intense lobbying effort by both the Republicans and Democrats from our area working with leadership in Madison to get that through the final budget in that budget year. We actually lived through them taking it out and putting it back in. And we could do a whole seminar just on the Confluence project and all of the twists and turns of getting this done. So it looked like June 2015, we were moving ahead. 2017, there was yet another twist as a state group who doesn't like tax increment financing filed a lawsuit against the city of Eau Claire because it was using TIF financing for what we felt was a worthwhile project, but they don't like TIF financing at all. And that ended up going all the way to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Chamber actually got involved because we were asked to be what is called an amicus, file an amicus brief, and we did that to talk about the impact to the community. And ultimately, the Supreme Court voted 5-2 to uphold the right of using TIF money. Had that gone the other way, it would actually jeopardize use of TIF money anywhere in the state for anything. So we do have the Confluence project. It's now become an important part of our community. So getting involved, voting, writing or calling elected officials, industry groups, civic organizations, attending council meetings, providing input, boards and commissions, and running for office yourself is another thing that you can do. So here's a quick recap of some of the other chamber opportunities. We do have a government affairs committee at the chamber. Actually, I think there's a couple of you participating on this program. We do things like this seminar and others to keep chamber members involved and informed. Our Eggs and Issues breakfasts have been a do-it-your-own breakfast this year, but we do have our next one coming up on December 18th. We do it every month on the third Friday. We'll have a legislative preview of the session coming up. There's also the Chippewa Valley Rally, which I'll talk about in a minute, and we do candidate forums and meet and greets and other kinds of things. Also, if you're not receiving it, we do put out every week, which I should have mentioned as an information source. It's not mine because I actually am involved in putting it together. But we do try to give you a quick digest every Monday of either things that are coming up you should be aware of or things that are important to our local economy that are in the news that you might want to explore more information about. So the Business Advocate is sent by email on the first business day of every week. And it's a free subscription if you're a chamber member. And if you're not getting it, just let us know and we can make sure you're getting on the mailing list. We also do the Chippewa Valley Rally every year. That's something we do jointly with the Chippewa Falls and Menominee Chambers of Commerce. We take a set of issues to Madison, like the Confluence Project, like other economic, education, and transportation issues and others. We've done it for 26 years. We plan to do something next year. We don't know if it will be our traditional get everybody on a bus and go to Madison. It'll probably be something different. So stay tuned. But that's a great opportunity for you to get involved, to interact with policymakers as regular citizens, and to look at issues that are important. So some of the issues to watch, just things that we're paying attention to. We do have a major issue in state government this year. UW-Eau Claire has proposed a new science and health sciences building. The last budget session funded the first phase of that. To actually build the building, we need to have the second phase funded in the next budget session. And then there's other development things around the community and activities like the Cannery District, the Sonantag West Menominee Street project, a transit center. There's eventual talk of a convention center. We had a housing task force the last couple of years to look at the housing shortage in the community as well as affordability, opportunity zones, homelessness, workforce infrastructure and education. And of course, COVID this year has brought lots of things to pay attention to, potential local ordinances, economic relief for businesses at all government levels. And then one of the things to think about between levels of government, these issues here have all come up as to where does this belong? Where does smoking regulation belong? Should minimum wages be set by communities or by the state? Should be able to ban plastic bags in one community but not another? Who can tax and how much? And what kind of limits are there on taxation? So those are the kinds of things that come up in our sometimes conflicts or mandates between levels of government. So we're going to get into a little bit more about what you can do and some specific things you can do, particularly running for office. And I'll just kind of watch for questions. I don't see any right now. So I'm going to move on to Grace. Grace is our intern this year, and she has some quick information for you on the elections that are coming up. Grace?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So this spring's election will take place on April 6th. And if needed, a primary election is going to take place on February 16th. So a primary is needed whenever there are more than 2 candidates running for a specific seat, and the 2 candidates who receive the most votes will move on to the general election. So this spring, we're going to see the state superintendent, 3 court of appeal judges, and local city council and school board members up for election. So we can go on to the next slide. So the Eau Claire City Council is made up of 10 city council members and 1 city council president. And each each member is elected for a 3-year term. So this spring, we're going to see the 5 district seats up for election. And then next slide. And this map, I think we saw it earlier, just gives you an idea as to where Eau Claire's 5 districts are. The next slide. Then the Altoona City Council is made up of 6 city council members and 1 mayor, and each member is elected for a 2-year term. In even number years, we see districts 1, 2, and 3 in the mayor positions up for election, but in 2021 and odd number years, districts 4, 5, and 6 are up for election. The next slide. So here's just a map outlining Altoona's wards and districts. Next slide. So if you're interested in running for city council, there are a few requirements that you need to know. Today, December 1st, is the first day that you may begin circulating nomination papers to collect signatures. And the deadline for declaring candidacy is 5 p.m. on Tuesday, January 5th. The campaign registration statement, declaration of candidacy, and nomination papers are the 3 forms you would need to submit. Next slide. And the number of signatures needed may vary by office and size of city, but both Eau Claire and Altoona's city council district seats require a minimum of 20 signatures, but no more than 40. And it's important to pay attention to the signatures you obtain on nomination papers. Signers must be eligible voters who live in the city limits, and in this case, within the district you are running for. And signers don't need to be registered voters, but they must give their complete address and date their signatures. And it's a good idea to obtain more than the minimum number, just in case any problems are found with the signatures, but you cannot collect more than the maximum number. So the next slide. And then the Eau Claire School Board has 7 members. 6 are elected for 3-year terms, and 1 is elected for a 1-year term. Joshua Clements and Markel Johnson currently hold the 3-year term seats, while Erica Zur has the 1-year term. Then the Altoona School Board has 5 members, each elected for 3-year terms, and Rick Reisler's seat is the only one up for election this spring. So to run for school board, the same types of forms as the municipality are needed, but the form is a little bit different. Once again, today is the first day you may begin circulating nomination papers, and the deadline to declare candidacy is 5 p.m. on January 5th. And so the Eau Claire School District requires more signatures to get onto the ballot than the Altoona School District. For Eau Claire, you will need 100 to 200 signatures, and the Altoona School District requires 20 to 100. So we can go on to the next slide. And then just for the state election, we have the state superintendent and court of appeals races this spring. The state of superintendent serves a 4-year term, and Caroline Stafford Taylor is the incumbent who was appointed by Tony Evers when he resigned from the position to take office as governor. And then the Eau Claire area is in the 3rd district for the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. So Mark Siedel's seat will be up for election. And Lisa Stark and Thomas Ruse are also judges who will be up for election in following years. So now as we go on to the next slide, I'm going to pass it back to Scott.
All right, I've got some information here that I'm not going to spend any time covering just because we're running short of time. But when I send this out, one of the things you'll find interesting is we've listed some of the different salaries that you earn if you're a public official. And you can see that if you're in Congress, you might earn over $100,000, but if you're on the Eau Claire City Council, you're going to get $3,000. And so a lot of these people are not in it for the money, given the time that they spend on these things. But you might find that interesting to take a look at, and it actually varies a lot by state as to the salaries. The other thing I wanted to mention real quickly is that if you're interested in getting more involved in government but don't want to run for office, although again, if you're interested or know somebody who is, we need people, good people running for some of our local offices. Both our county and city and even the school district have a lot of commissions and committees that have citizen members. You can see some of the city ones here. On their website, they have a resource bank form where you can apply. And the same way with the county, on their website, they have a list of their commissions and boards, even a list of some that have current openings and a place that you can go in and apply for that. And you can use special expertise that you might have, or just because you're interested in a particular area. I've actually served on a couple ad hoc committees where they had a temporary committee, and the city just formed something called the Housing Opportunities Commission. I was involved in the Housing Task Force, and representing the chamber, I'm actually a member of the Housing Opportunities Commission to look at housing supply and affordability in our community, and that just started meeting this fall. So some of you may even be on some of those, and I know there's some other officials here as well. So we covered a lot of information today. We're interested in your feedback. If there's any of these topics you'd like to hear more about, or we could spend more time, or subjects you'd like us to do other programs on, or if you have any other comments or questions, feel free to chime in or ask one. I am going to mention one real quick. Mark Halverson notes that realclearpolitics.com is a website, and I should have mentioned that because that's one I look at quite frequently. They post a lot of opinion pieces, but they do it across the political spectrum, and probably a pretty good ratio of pros and cons in particular issues. So you'll see a lot of things there. You could spend an entire day reading all the pieces that they post links to. So
Scott, looks like
welcome. Any other
question come in from Evan. Quickly touch on why I think it's important for community members to run for office.
Well, if you don't, who will? If you have, I think it's part of being a good citizen to say, how can I best serve my community? You can argue that in the system of government we have, it depends entirely on the involvement of its citizens. And then you need to sort of weigh yourself. Do I have a special area of expertise or motivation where I can help my community? And then of course, it does need to be a decision based on your family and your job and other factors, whether you can do that. But certainly think about how could you be more involved in the community, whether it's dashing off an email to a public official, whether it's calling somebody on the phone, or whether it's going a little bit farther and looking into asking to serve on a board or commission, or even running for office for yourself. Or if you know of somebody who would do well and you can help them out, because it's hard to do it completely on your own. I don't know if that's a very good answer, but I think if you don't do it, there will be people motivated who might have a completely different opinion than you, or not the kind of expertise you have, and the decisions may not be as good as they would be if you were involved.
That's great. Appreciate it. All right, well, we're just a couple of minutes past 1 o'clock here, so I want to thank Scott again for taking the time to speak with us. A ton of great information. I know it's very insightful for me. I feel like as a newbie and not very knowledgeable on government, especially local government, I feel like this was very helpful. So we hope you got something out of it, and it offered something for everybody out there. So I appreciate everybody hopping online and joining us. And thanks again to Scott in the chamber and Casey in the YP group for helping us to put this on. So appreciate it, everybody. Thank you and have a good day.